We are starting a brand new season of the Vanguard Chronicles by going back to our roots. We have told some amazing stories in some incredible one-shots, and we want to help you do the same on this episode of the Vanguard Chronicles. Welcome, everyone, to the Vanguard Chronicles podcast, Season 2, where we have an ongoing conversation into the creative process behind the Vanguard, our monthly crowdsourced D&D campaign of interconnected one-shots. I'm one of the hosts and Dungeon Master of the Vanguard, Nathan, also known as Spark Ascendant, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Sean, a.k.a. General Grom. Sean, it is a new year and a new season of the Vanguard Chronicles podcast. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing very well. We had a very successful year last year, and you know we really did a lot, and I'm so proud of us and so proud of what we've accomplished. But yes, we closed the first season of the podcast with 17 episodes, and we figured we kind of wrapped it up with the behind the scenes of Tabletop for Chops. So we're going to start a new season. This will be the first episode, and I think Nathan will tell us a little bit more about what we're going to be getting into today.
Yeah, we have been absolutely cooking with some ideas of what we want to present and what we want to talk about in the upcoming season. We realized that actually we've been talking a lot about these interconnected one-shots and sharing our ideas and the ways that we've been bringing our community together. And we wanted to really try and bring more inspiration to you, the players and the DMs who want to get into doing something like this yourselves. So as a result, today starts, I guess, a series of recurring style episodes we'll be doing where we want to talk about some of the really interesting and cool ways that you can create memorable one-shots to bring to your tables, be it at an interconnected game like we run, at your local LGS, or at your home tables when you're just trying to show new people a game of D&D. It's super cool. We're totally stoked for it. We've been cooking in our pre-planning session, just talking about all the things we want to do in the upcoming year, and I'm excited to get started. So, Sean, you ready to go?
Yeah, definitely. First off, as always, like, subscribe, the notification icon, comment. We love hearing the comments. Those things are real important to us. Kind of helps us kind of build this. But also, again, this whole purpose is to benefit our charity, extralife.org. Last year, we did really well, and we'll be doing similar events coming up this year, too. We're talking about maybe doing another live stream on top of another Tabletop for Chops. So, there's the QR on the screen. You can click there and donate directly to our team at extralife.org. We have, if people are really enjoying the hoodies and the hats and stuff that we've already made, if they want to get involved in that, send us a comment. We'll try to get a new order going. You can go to goldenalchemy.com and order dice trays. We still have all that going on. So all that does help the charity, and it is really important to us. So, but this is going to be a fun kind of topic. We're going to get a little bit more into our individual specifics. I think we're going to have Ryan on the show a little later to kind of talk about one of his games. So this is going to be fun.
I also want to take a moment to thank another of our partners that we've had. I don't have them inside the box, but I do want to thank Misty Mountain Gaming as well, as they helped us create our own custom set of dice. You can also help support them by purchasing from their store at mistymountaingaming.com, using the code name, Vanguard, I believe is our code as well, for 10% off. Their dice are super cool. I've now bought numerous sets, not just the custom ones, but like these liquid core inserts that I love rolling with. So absolutely give them a look too, as all the proceeds and through all these partnerships are also helping us further support the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, which has been just such a joy this past year.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that being said, and without further ado, before we dig in a little bit deeper into some of the one-shots that we have run and some of the memorable experiences we brought to our own personal tables, we're going to talk about just some general advice for how to do this. Now, Sean and I spoke a lot beforehand about how we didn't want this to just be a, hey, here's a cool session we ran, but we really wanted to make this something where you guys can get more of the principles that go into how we create such big, memorable awesome moments that truly have our players engaged and talking about the session until the next month when we get to run again.
Yeah, that's gonna be fun. Like, some of our to me, the it can kinda start with, for the way I kind of design my games is I look at what the villains are doing or what my end product, the bad guy, where does that play into it? So and then I work my story a little bit backwards from that. So I wanna make sure I know when the players as I lay out the territory, so to speak, that the players can understand the goal that they're trying to accomplish. Because in a one shot, it's kind of important to have a solid goal. I think it's probably some of the best advice I can come up with is have a solid goal in mind that you want your players to accomplish, and then give them the obstacles and align the things to your story. Kind of in that process, that's where I start, and it's probably one of my first a piece of advice you can do for this.
We'll definitely as well. You'll see, I think, a thread in a lot of our stories. You and I have said before on previous episodes how I know I also, I mean, the new monster manual comes out next month for us recording now, and God, I always start from my villain as well. But I think a
Yeah,
really core idea for a lot of the one shots that you'll hear us describe in a lot of our design processes, we kind of start with that core idea, that core
right,
moment, that kernel, like the thing you want to be the big deal of your session. And
right.
then I certainly myself and Sean, I think you're the same way. We tend to design out from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we were in our pre-planning, we're talking about you can break rules, make up rules, steal ideas. There's nothing, I look at, some of my favorite movies and back up and go, oh, I can maybe tell an element from within that story that I can kind of expand into something we're doing because I thought it was pretty cool. There's nothing wrong with it. Uh, I think being creative is about using your resources as much as you can.
For sure. I mean, again, a thing I think a lot of people forget, especially newer DMs who are just getting into it and kind of experimenting a little bit, is I mean, there is a rule book. Like there are actual rules for Dungeons and
Right,
Dragons, but especially when you're in the DM seat, there are no rules for what is right and what is wrong, what you
right,
can and what you cannot do. There's this
right.
social agreement between you and the other players at the table that you're going to do your best to provide a good experience for them that everyone will enjoy and everyone will feel comfortable with and happy with, and they'll get that kind of experience. But in terms of like any mechanical things, tweak and change as much as you want. There's no set guideline of, oh, you can't do this. You can't run this many monsters. You can't run the same monster. You can't, I don't know, play with time. You can't, in some places, lie to the player's face about what is actually going on.
Right,
All
right.
of these are areas where if you really begin to make it your own and experiment and expand, you can, the limits really start to come off. And you see that the more you experiment as you go.
Yeah, that's one of the things when you think about how the Vanguard works and the scalable nature that our games have to play in, you have to be able to kind of on the fly tweak a monster or tweak, something. So like you could have over prepared and then you can really there is no such thing because you never know what your players are going to do. But ultimately, you're right. You make it yours, and that agreement you have with your players, it goes both ways. That they agree to kind of buy into your story a bit and yes and dig in and not just try to go I didn't really want to do that today. It's like, well, why are you here? What I mean?
I think one thing, a common critique I hear from a lot of people talking about Dungeons and Dragons specifically, because for anyone who's new, that's the system that we run our campaign in, is that it's very much a combat focused RPG system,
Right,
right?
right,
Especially compared to a lot of others. I highly encourage other people to check out other rule systems than just D&D 5e. But
right,
I think when you do begin to experiment and see what other systems do and what they change, you do notice the ways in which some games are much more storytelling oriented than 5e is, right?
right,
And D&D 5e itself is much more storytelling oriented than another game like Shadow of the Demon Lord or Pathfinder is a fantastic
right,
example, right?
right,
But what you start to realize though, especially if you're someone who comes from like a video game background like I do, is that core to all of these is that storytelling experience. and not the video gamey, crunchy, solvable problems, and
Mhm.
that school of designing scenarios that comes from, right, video game design or board game design. Tabletop design, by the improvisational nature, I have to improvise how to pronounce that, itself is so much more freeing to allow you to get so much more creative with what you can do, what you can design, and again, the ways that you can put your own ideas, make them yours, and then share them with the players at your table.
Absolutely, that's the fun part, I think, of the DM experience. For me, I've always been very story driven. Is I like what makes a good story. You can talk about. I mean, we can talk about that on a completely different podcast and what actually makes a good story. And some of it is, it starts with believable and memorable characters, whether it's your NPCs or giving the players those characters room to be memorable. You know what I mean? Give them moments that you can interject into that make them feel memorable, and then that lends to make a good story kind of play out.
And when we talk about players, I mean, let's be clear, the players are not just the PCs. The
Yeah,
DM is a player at that table, and the DM
absolutely.
themselves is someone who contributes to carrying this through. We were talking about, we like to describe this as kind of the follow through, because I mean, an easy way to make a session more memorable is also to, even yourself, be hyped for the cool things you create, be hyped for the cool story moments
Right,
that occurred at your table, and
right.
also carry those into later sessions to further develop other smaller story threads, not necessarily stories, but threads that will then have the players continuing to think, continue to dwell, and also thus add weight to those huge and memorable moments that you've created. Again, in just what was one session, now carrying to be so much more.
Yeah, that is, I think, an essence to making this really fun is that you commit to your players that you're going to do the best you can and tell them the best experience and give the best unfolding story that you can, to letting them kind of put the pieces together. But having characters that kind of recur, takes it does a very fun job in of making a one shot feel a bit more like a campaign, even though in our case they are truly one shots. They're meant to happen in one session. They are meant to happen, have a beginning, middle, and end, and you have to truncate that in a certain sense and find mechanisms that help you get from one point to the next. Whether it be you start later at night, so you need them to get into a long rest situation because you want them to dream. You know what I mean? So you need that to happen. So you make it happen late at night.
Sorry, I'm laughing because even small things you can do for just making things more memorable. You talk about, having them go for a long rest so that you can get them to sleep, so you can get them to dream. I mean, even capitalizing on just small moments, such as whether or not a group decides that they want to go to sleep,
Or
whether or
right,
not they want to camp for the night, as I just experienced in my most recent session, can lead to some really petty discourse of like, I think we should camp. Oh, I think we shouldn't camp. And then
right,
that can become a running like gag or joke or concept that
right,
even through your descriptions you can kind of feed that fire, and again
right.
continue to follow through on that idea. It can be just a petty joke and an inside joke that carries through a session, or it can be those kinds of details in a similar manner that carry beyond the session to keep rolling and snowballing further and further past your first game.
Yeah, I think there are times, especially in our games and the games that I've written, I know that there's going to be a continue. I can kind of feel it happening. I'm watching the players, and you want to find those inside tracks, those inside jokes, those things that are uh, that make it memorable for your players, because you need to give them that space. You want them to kind of come up with that, not you necessarily forcing it into the story. If you can kind of do it and then adapt as it's happening, then you kind of lead your players a little bit better, and then they feel much more inclined to continue on with this running joke that you've kind of established.
Which does certainly lean into improvisational skills, which I did way better on the word that time.
Yeah,
uh
good swing.
Improvisational skills, and play, which I'm developing in the same way that you will develop your own. In that, that involves taking things that the players are doing themselves
Hmm.
and adding them to what you're doing, right? Because in
Right.
the same way that, we emphasize that the DM is a player at the table, they are also not the only arbiter of the story, as the players are helping to build the narrative and the story as well too.
Right.
And there are ways in which you can kind of set up or prepare yourself specifically to allow player input and player influence to come into your design, the story you're telling, the moment you're creating, and then expand beyond that, which I think we'll demonstrate in some of the stories we're trying to tell. um, Allows, it makes it much more significant because they're ideas that came from the players, and so they have much more weight to the players because, right, it started from them.
Yeah, in our case too, because we put out teasers and we try to tease each of our games leading up into it. A lot of our players have an idea like, I want to do that. I see that. I'm interested in it. I hit, um, when I'm already sitting at the table playing a game that I know I'm interested in because I started out that way. The teaser got me interested in it. I'm hyped up for it. Now I know that I see my DM, he's hyped up for it, or they're hyped up for it, and it makes it a much easier transition when to get into your game and let your story just kind of flourish. That's to me where it kind of starts.
It definitely does. And even, well, actually, it's very similar to, some people have asked before, our style of campaign that we run, our interconnected one shots, is very similar to a West Marches style of campaign. It's a little different in some of the nuance of how we run it, but very similar to a West Marches style. Like, that's the whole idea behind that kind of campaign, where players specifically request the type of quests and sessions that they want to go on. But again, that's not just a player responsibility.
Right.
You are the DM, you are the arbiter of this world. And although you don't want to railroad players and say, okay, well, do you want to go to the left or to the right? Well, no matter which way you pick, right? I'm just going to say it's the exact same room. You don't want to do that level of railroading. But again, it's kind of a symbiotic relationship where you are listening to your players' interests and then letting that guide you to then designing something that also better fits what they're doing, or making small, subtle improvisational calls. I'm not trying to say that word so much. That will then get their attention piqued as they say, oh, wait a minute, I was looking for that. And it feels natural. It can feel very unplanned for to them, when really it was something that you were cooking up the entire time.
Right, which is kind of what you do as a DM. And again, also don't think you have to. It's like there's some DMs feel like you can make a game memorable by coming up with a particular voice or a particular persona of a character, and you kind of really lean into that improving, acting kind of thing, and that can help, but it's not necessary. I try to encourage as much role play as I can, but you can't make them do it. So you find their level of comfort, you let them lead you as well as you lead them, and it's kind of very symbiotic. So you're going with improvisational, I'm going with symbiotic.
Yeah, that's cool. We both have our buzzwords. So cool.
There we
That's a
go.
good start. Well, let's not beat around the bush too much more. I think we should probably start talking about some of these sessions. We're going to talk about three in particular. We're going to be talking about Promise and Shadow, A Hydra Ahead, and I almost called it the joke name we came up with earlier, Cinder's Echo. Excuse me. Yeah, three
Which
sessions that we've run and we've been really proud of. And in case you're wondering, well, there's only two of us. It's probably time to introduce the other person who will be joining us on this episode of the podcast. All right, everybody, welcome for our third take on this. Ryan to the podcast here. Ryan is yet another of our DMs. You guys have seen him before in season 1 a couple times. He's also producer of the podcast. Thank God. That's all you do, though.
I
Ryan.
am.
Any other jump?
And I was just back behind the scenes. I just want you to know that in the second take of this, Nathan did call me an esteemed DM. So I don't want that to get wasted.
no.
On the good people watching. So, but I am
Good.
here. I am ready to discuss what made at least this episode or this one shot of mine memorable. I hope it was memorable. I can tell you the players that I played with, told me that they had a great time, as much fun as I did. I think I always have more fun than my players, but I did run a Promise and Shadow. So I guess the format here is, as we're going to do this, as Nathan said, we're just going to kind of run down three of our one shots, and we'll kind of do these not regularly, but this is kind of be a new format that we're going to bring forward. And we're talking specifically about what made these one shots memorable? Are we talking about memorable to me, memorable to the players? Nathan, what do you think?
I mean, honestly, I think you kind of hit it right on the head there when you mentioned how excited at least you are and how much fun
Yeah.
you have compared
Mhm.
to your players. I
Yeah.
think that's kind of true for all of us, at least in our heads, because one thing we say a lot here with the Vanguard is all of us DMs are running a campaign while all of our players are actually running one shots.
Right.
So I think we all have that level of excitement. But I mean, it was memorable to you. It was memorable to your players. Look, dog, this is the one that you picked out specifically, and I want to see how you ran it. I also know a little bit about it too. Spoiler
Yeah.
alert, because we do talk about this stuff beforehand. But yeah, come on, bud, take us
This was
through.
the Promise and Shadow. This was I mean, one thing I love to do. I'll speak to me. I love to do is, when you want to make something memorable and you got nowhere to go to, right? I chose to run this one in the Feywild, and when in doubt, make it weird.
Good choice.
Right? We talked about the Feywild beforehand,
Make it weird.
and in a different episode, Planes of Existence. And if you want to make something weird, the Feywild is absolutely the place to make it weird. So immediately we kind of took off. I believe the city was Astrozelian, if I'm not mistaken. And the premise, you guys talked about this beforehand. You both really take a concept, a premise, that big moment, and that's where you work from. In this particular case, this was a little bit off because what I did was I ran a one shot before this called Prisoner 626, and they successfully freed a prisoner named Thorn of Eldoria, and he is critical to our campaign. They were
Real
successful in
quick, real
freeing
quick.
him. Yeah, sure.
I have to ask for our listeners: are you sure the prisoner's name is not Stitch? Is that a Lilo and Stitch reference with the 626?
It was. So, just out of curiosity, I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent, but did you not catch that the first time around? Was this the first time you're catching that?
I couldn't remember if we'd had this
Yeah.
discussion or not. So I guess call it me validating if we'd had this discussion before.
Yeah, it's a favorite movie of mine. I love that movie. But yes, that was the reason I ran Prisoner 66. It was a slight spin-off of Prisoner 13, if anybody's familiar with that one shot.
Right.
It was kind of the premise too, but it was preceding A Promise in Shadow. So the premise that we had to go to the Feywild and free Thorin's family if he is to cooperate with the Vanguard Guild. So there's your big moment, right? Go find his family. Now, where they were, this was kind of one of the other things that led me to probably the first time I've ever done this. When they went to the Feywild, they had to mingle at a party. So typically in RP, you just have players look around and mingle. But I can tell you one thing: when given an open room with a huge party and players that have wildly different varying backgrounds of experience, asking them to mingle at a party in D&D is the kiss of death for any DM's session. It just doesn't really work out. So things that maybe you can take from my game, what I did was I gave them options. Right? It wasn't just one or two people. I told them that there were sort of pockets or groups. So to make it memorable, in this particular case, their goal, and this was to find an agent of the monomaterial that was here that would know where the family was in the Feywild. And I'm a fan of big, expensive sets. I think you guys have seen that before. You can also make it memorable. But one of the things that I chose to do, I'm not sure that everybody can see this, is I had hangers that kind of gave pictures of the groups of people, and then descriptions and names of the groups of people, and they could question those people and interrogate them. And they kind of had to find this monomaterial agent. And so
almost like briefing, effectively.
What now?
Almost like briefing sheets, effectively.
Yeah, very, very similar. But I treated them.
Oh, that's so cool.
I treated them to hangers, which were over there, so they got some information. And if you can see on the other side, there's my information as well. So again, simple things that make it memorable. You're not taking all this time to describe large groups of people. So for RP, sometimes a little bit of AI, a little bit of pre-generated artwork can be your best friend. And if you caught it here and you're a fan of, let's say, School of Rock, you have names like Huey McGlynn that were in there. So things to make it even more memorable that can stand out, that can pop if people like you just saw catch Prisoner 626 or pop culture references, it kind of, pops a little
Oh,
bit. And it
that's
resonates,
so
right?
clever to it's so clever to draw in like those other references to highlight them because you get the connection.
Right.
Also, I don't want to breeze past this because for our listeners, I want to describe what you actually just showed up. So that when he said hangers, what Ryan has are these little sheets of paper, or full-size sheets of paper that he has partially folded at the top, so it hangs over his DM screen, and on the player-facing side are big text, big font profiles of characters at the party, and on the backside, this blew my mind. I didn't know you do this. This is so cool. Is smaller text. Even that's such a cool thing because yeah, just by changing the things you bring to the table physically makes that moment stand out. That's so cool.
Right. And
Yeah, and I'm a
Go ahead.
props DM too, so like I get that whole feeling. It's like it's kind of cool to when you hand over and that tactile transference of immersion. I think really helps.
Yeah,
That's
and a
sick.
lot of times it's the difference of, playing the game of American football versus, football. And, those two games, they're professional sports, but one can be played with very minimal things. So it's important to kind of realize, yeah, you can go both ways, but these are simple things to use because, this podcast is really geared towards making sure you can make it memorable, but that doesn't mean spending tons and tons of dollars. You got a printer, let's go. I mean, there are so many
Yeah.
free resources out there that, you can utilize to do things like that. So they ended up finding this particular NPC. They talked about him, and the NPC said, "You need to go to find Morialis, who's the big bad guy of this particular episode." Morialis is holding the Thorne's family, Thorne's wife and Thorne's child there, and so the players took off and they went to a cave. They had a little puzzle to solve in the cave, and there were kind of things that led to them unlocking a sort of puzzle to get through to the other side of this waterfall. And one thing, again, that you can kind of do to make it memorable are those sort of transition scenes as they move through. You describe them walking through the waterfall or this gate in the waterfall. And as they look forward into and past the waterfall, they can see this gigantic scene, a big tower, a pond with sort of stone pillars next to it. And they watch as one of their companions walks through the waterfall gate forwards and then appears horizontally as if they came up out of the pond, laying down face forward, up onto their feet, right? So you're playing with gravity. Small little details like that make huge differences because those descriptions of a world that just doesn't operate in the same mechanics they are in currently really trigger those sort of, those imagination vibes, right? They're just those things that go,
And those
wow, okay,
descriptions
that's cool.
those descriptions really do a lot as well too, to like you'd be surprised. We've heard on this in previous episodes before, but those small descriptors, the right ones, and particularly vivid or unique details that redefine something like that,
Hmm.
even that alone, such a small piece, gets the player's mind reeling. And once they're reeling and going, they're filling in the rest of the details, and they have already imagined the most unimaginable thing for you from just a single sentence you have dropped. That's awesome.
Right. And I mean, look, as we said, I am looking at our show notes right now, right? Pull from other things, steal ideas. You don't have to claim that every one shot and every detail of your one shot is your own. I mean, chances are you're going to pull from tropes, right? We all do that,
Right.
and people recognize them, but it's how you combine that and then make it meaningful to your characters at the time or your players' characters at the time, right? Because that's what resonates with them. And in fact, from
Right.
famous show, as of time of recording, somebody had this vivid detail of as a sorcerer shooting a lightning bolt, but then using it to transmute that lightning bolt into thunder damage. And the DM, I'm sure everybody can guess who it was, says you watch the arc of lightning shoot through the being, and typically where you'd see the arcs of electricity run through the body, it just makes a beeline straight through it and disappears as if you saw this streak of lightning in the sky hit, and then 2 seconds later, boom, it explodes as if you would hear that thunder afterwards rolling in from a mile
Right.
away because they transmuted it from lightning to thunder damage. Now, how cool is that? I mean, that is a
Right.
genuinely
Right.
amazing description. And those details, again, just like the pond that I kind of described there, walking up, and kind of
Right.
gravity stripping and seeing people appear on the other side of the waterfall. They're big parts, right? They engage people. They make it memorable.
Right.
And so the last bit was the epic fight. So I'll kind of, I'll show, people won't see this on the, on the podcast if you're listening to audio only, but I have, a little character here that I painted. It's a little sort of face sorceress, right? And she is Morialis, but I will also hold up this now Fey Dragon here as well that was also painted. This is also Morialis, right? So Morialis, the fight comes in stages. And if anybody is a fan of video games or bosses in general, break them up into stages. And that's what this happened. It doesn't need to be a linear fight. The baddie can grow or get bigger or can, mutate from one type of threat to another type of threat. And that becomes something that we can play with, right?
There's precedent for that too, and actually in published 5e material, I think it's specifically some Mythic Odysseys of Theros, which is a great resource book if anyone doesn't have it. It's basically everything you need to put a pantheon of gods and mythical creatures or Greek-inspired stuff in your game. It's based on a Magic the Gathering setting called Theros. But Mythical Odysseys of Theros has certain monsters with, I believe they're called mythic actions, or I think that's the term they use. It's compounding on in D&D, for anyone who doesn't know or hasn't, if we've got new DMs who haven't looked in the monster manual, you have legendary actions, which are effectively extra actions monsters, really powerful monsters get to take out of their turn sequence. It's to handle the action economy and make it so that if you have one monster and multiple players, that multiple players are getting to do a lot of other stuff still. But mythic actions are other actions that occur, if I'm correct here, on specific triggering occurrences. So regardless as to theirs and how they do it, an example would be, a most basic one might be like, oh yeah, the boss that you get him down to 50% health, second stage, he gets new moves, transformed, does whatever. So that precedent already exists in officially published material, let alone as we've been saying, breaking the rules, stealing it, doing whatever the hell you want. But please proceed with your example.
Yeah, so her mythic action was when she got down to 0. I asked one of the players who had brought her down to 0, how do you want to do this? And he described exactly how he killed Morialis. And then time unwound from that because Morialis's moniker is Morialis the Time Bender. And so one of the things that she can do is kind of rewind time. You can only do it obviously once, but that triggered her second phase transformation into a Fey Dragon, adult Fey Dragon, and our players were 3rd and 4th level. So obviously, people who have played these stat blocks before know that that's probably an imbalance. So we had episodes about this before, but we never really go into much detail because we kind of want to save them for the more topical episodes. How do you make things? How do you make these encounters bigger, running things for low-level players? The engagement portion is slightly different in this because what you can do is offer things like environmental buffs, because dumbing down the boss doesn't mean that you have to lower the stat blocks, right? You can give them particular advantages. So I'll hold up a couple more things. For those of you who can't see, small little prop. It's just a little crystals, some purple crystals, and then some yellow cat mushrooms here. And I sprinkled this and some other different things around the cave, and they didn't know this, but if they chose to interact with them, they would get buffs. And going back to player engagement, how to make it memorable, everybody loves collecting. So one last thing I'll show for those of you who can't see, are these little sheets, and they have pictures of the exact same things, and they kind of look like Pokemon cards. So again, all of this stuff is free. None of it is paid for. You can use your home printer for things like this. And I'll just describe Simulacrite, which was the purple crystals I was holding up. And that is a simulacrum spawns of the creature that touches the crystal. And after suffering, you suffer a little bit of damage. The simulacrum starts with a similar amount of hit points equal to the damage dealt. So basically, you double yourself, right? And now there's 2 of you, which becomes then another memorable moment when somebody touches a crystal, the crystal breaks, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, there's 2 of me, right? I have a bet me. And the person that got this was probably the worst person for me, best person for the group, and proceeded to shoot lightning bolts of this creature. But did a fantastic job of downing them, even though this boss was not meant to be downed at the time. But credit to the players, they did a great job, and they told them, you can bring her back, but the rule was a kill's a kill. You affected fate, and congratulations, because that in the end is what truly makes it memorable, when the players achieve something that they weren't necessarily supposed to, but you honor that anyway, right?
That's also, I'm even just caught off guard because that's such a cool way to balance as well. Because, oh no, they one-shot the boss in one go. You can kind of use that as a decent little test bed of like, what's the player capability for phase 1? Because then if they overshoot, cool. Once they hit 0, all those attacks go, and now I get to reset. Now the real fight kicks off. That's a clever. That's kudos. That's real cool.
Yeah. So all these different ways that players can be engaged, can make it memorable. For the cheap, these props aren't necessarily needed. You could use dice, D4 dice to spread them around. But like I said, I hope that the players had a good time. I can tell you, I had a good time leading into this next segment because I also got to break out my humming tunes, and I believe I participated just slightly, ever so slightly. If I wasn't modeled after by the actual painted model itself, I believe you had a fantastic time playing a Hydra ahead, Nathan.
Yeah, a Hydra ahead. Both Sean and Ryan got to hear me cooking up this idea for a little bit. So specifically, a Hydra ahead is a session I ran 2 months ago. This was our December session. We had just finished Tabletop for Chop. I wanted to cut loose a little bit, and I was looking through. We have a generous volunteer among our players who has a 3D printer. Rather, he volunteers the 3D printer and does a lot of work printing all kinds of terrain and models and stuff for us. And I saw among one of the libraries we use a lot, I'll actually shout out to them, Flesh of Gods on My Mini Factory, and I believe they have their own website. Amazing 3D models.
Love them.
They had I got this one from Dragon Trapper's Lodge. Excuse me. Another one we use, but Flesh of Gods also has one of these. It's a false Hydra.
But Nathan, could you please describe for the audience
what
is a false Hydra?
I knew when I put that question verbatim like that
I'd read
show notes.
I'd read it just like that.
I knew both you. The moment I saw, I was like, oh, Sean has to get in on this too. So for anyone who doesn't know what a false Hydra is, Google it like during the daytime. Don't Google it at night. But the idea of a false Hydra, again, I like to start from the monster. It is not an official D&D monster, but it's one that's kind of within the pop culture mythos of D&D. It is a Hydra of sorts. It's kind of this fleshy lump that at some point grows a singular head. Kind of bald head, big teeth, dark, soulless eyes. And then it grows another head. And then it grows another head. And what happens is it sings this song, and those who hear the song are manipulated by it. Such that it's kind of like if anyone's seen Doctor Who and is familiar with, I think they're called the Silence, the alien species who, the moment you look away from them, you forget they're there. They wipe your mind out. So frequently players over the course, characters from that series might write on their hand, so that way, right, when they look away, they forget, but they look at their hand, they say like, they're all around you or something like that. The false Hydra does the same thing. And the idea is it will appear and then it will, infest some kind of town, slowly people will start to go missing from the town as the Hydra lures people to its lair, eats, grows more heads, until eventually I think the Lord, they're disgusting creatures, is it becomes basically so large and has that it can't move, has nothing else to eat because it's eaten the entire town. And I think they just finally die. I forget if that's exactly it, but either way, oh my god, the creepy story potential. False Hydras are
Yeah,
so
that
creepy.
is your jam. I mean, if anything, Nathan's jam is disgusting creatures. There are people that run
Mhm.
manticores and fluffy griffins, and Nathan's like, no, soulless lump, 100% all the time.
I, really, it was I saw the model of Dragon Trapper's line. I was like, that's really cool.
Mhm.
I'm actually a little surprised that I didn't do the one on Flesh of Gods instead, but
There's
maybe I'll get to run
always
that another
time,
time.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure I will find an excuse to put another false Hydra on the table. But so, as anyone who's listening to that is considering, though, and I'm sure some DMs are thinking, especially those who've run false Hydras. So I like to challenge myself, and for our Christmas session, I want to do something unique for the holidays. So, so I thought a false Hydra would be a cool challenge because, um, as you can imagine, if I just make that a stat block that the players go up against, and maybe they roll a whiz check, and after I find some stat block online, I mean that's cool. And false Hydras are memed about enough, and are kind of, if you know them enough. They're kind of like knowing what happens if you put a bag of holding in another bag of holding. Some players know, and when they know, it's just that thing in the back of the mind that it doesn't occur, it doesn't happen often because they're such a challenge to run. So I was like, I really want to do this justice. So I immediately decided, well, the whole thing with false Hydra is you don't realize that you've been hearing it singing. And well, if I have the players rolling dice on certain things, then that will break the illusion. So I need to lie to them from the jump and give them clues. And as long as I toe the line carefully and I'm fair and I don't cheat them and like put them into a situation where like, oh, well, you guys didn't know that I was lying to you, so you die. And I give them opportunities to catch it, then this gets to become a much more, it was so cool. It was so much fun
Right.
to run
And
this.
if you remember back, there was a line earlier in here that you might have cringed on. And it was specifically, lie to the players. And a lot of time there's dungeon masters that will say, oh, you can say what they see and you can be very specific about it. But there are times where if you are towing the line very, very carefully, I will tell you, I know everybody who played at your table, and they could have cared less because you gave them ample opportunities at the specific times. But this was a time where lying to your players, that's part of the gig, right?
Oh, 100%. So the first clue I gave them was the setup was they were going to investigate through a hag that we have a tenuous alliance with, was giving them information on a contact of hers that would give them greater information to how to bring down a group called the Monomaterial and an enemy foe we're hunting down. So go talk to the contact for info on our enemy. That is their mission. That's the mission we put in the descriptor as well. And that's all true. I had them take a letter that the hag gave them that said specifically, I think the literally first words are, remember, you are looking for the Hydra. I use that wording specifically because the description I gave the players before the session started was, you are looking for a contact known by the alias the Hydra. So in my setup of what they cognitively know, I said it's an alias. But in the physical paper that was given to them, it says it is, you are looking for the Hydra. And part of the reason I did this is one of the fun parts of the lore that I liked for false Hydras is, so if I notice, if, Ryan's my next door neighbor and all of a sudden Ryan disappears and he hasn't been seen, and like I go over because I'm friends with the family or whatever, I'm like, hey, what, weird, why do you have like, there's like a dude's clothes up here, like, there's like, some a weird like baseball caps and hockey paraphernalia up here, like, is it, do you have a husband, like, no, those were here when I moved in, right? Mines will fill in the gap to justify stuff. And I
Right.
leaned into that real heavy too. So the note had really cryptic clues that were written very specifically, such that if you aren't paying attention to what I'm saying versus what's in the note, you just fill in the blank automatically as a player.
Right. And that's the
But the
subtle
moment you start,
that's the subtle lies, right? The subtle lies are the best because it's the players trick themselves. You're not necessarily doing it, and it is every DM wants to pull off their own Kaiser Sose moment. And if you haven't seen The Usual Suspects, shame on you. I'm sorry, it's a fantastic movie, but at the end there's something important that happens, right? And all the subtle clues are there, but your mind kind of filled in the blanks where it they thought it should go, but not where you were intending them to go, right?
this was a case in point of where I really had to improv a lot for this session.
Okay.
When I prep for improv, I set up very key details specifically so I can improv around it. I try to take it more of a logical approach to improv, where if I know enough of the setting, improving becomes more of thinking what a logical response is.
Mm-hmm.
That was a little weird for this one because I had to create specific illogical responses.
Right.
But another great lie I set up, or rather like a red herring or detail for the players to catch on to, was I started them in the tavern. I said, you've been sleeping. They're like, how long have we been here? I'm like, you guys have probably been here for like about a week or so. I was very vague with it because to them, they thought, oh, Nathan is improving as a DM and being vague because Nathan is being vague. But actually, it's because they have been here for well over a month, but they're filling in memories. So again, I'm using the fourth wall break of the nature of me, Nathan, being a person to make them think that, oh, Nathan's just filling in. That's why this doesn't 100% line up. When no, I'm giving them the most accurate information I can as a DM. And I was prepped for this kind of stuff. This also then went down to get some food. So I described how they go down to get food. And I said, yeah, you just go into the kitchen and get some food. Like, wait, isn't there like a barkeep? Like, this isn't really a bar. This tavern's just kind of been abandoned for a while. Most people just kind of go into the storehouse and just kind of grab food. They're like, how much food's here? I'm like, there's not a lot of food left, right? And they started asking these kinds of questions, just all these odd occurrences, till finally the best question I got was, I want to go back up to our room. How many like bedrolls, like how many people does it seem like we came with? And we had a party of 6. I said, there's 7 bedrolls in there. And immediately some of the players who are DMs themselves and know what a false hydra is, immediately heads went to hands. Oh my God. Oh my God. And what I used in this moment is first I did one thing. I play a game called Dead by Daylight. Short version is it's a horror multiplayer game. There is a character who has a very simple lullaby that she sings as she's going around hunting players. I hummed that lullaby a few times and I said, sorry guys, that song is stuck in my head. I then, every time the players caught on to one of these key details, I said, can you make a wisdom save for me? As the players, not the characters, the players were catching on. When they finally succeeded, every time they caught on to a weird thing or made some kind of logical jump to connect the mystery, it was an opportunity for a wisdom save. And once they got a wisdom save, I then described how you hear that lullaby, again, showing that it wasn't just it's stuck in my head. This is me alluding to and setting them up. So I'm using all these fourth wall breaks to let the players uncovering the mystery line up perfectly with the characters solving the mystery and the idea that there is a false hydra. Oh my God, you're in so much danger.
So when they succeeded on the wisdom save, that's when they heard the lullaby?
Yes, specifically.
Okay, yeah.
And then we had one player who put on like earmuffs. I gave her advantage on the roll. Still failed the roll, so I had to take the earmuffs back off. But they kept doing this over and over again until eventually they got enough correct and were able to kind of like make enough jumps. Again, we kind of improving as far as how to respond to each of those. They just came up with their own creative solutions to guide them to one of them pulled out the letter, called out the code that the hag had said on it. And at that point, that broke the spell. The Hydra responded by letting them hear the music and then letting them lead to its actual lair as it realized, oh, the hag sent them. They're cool. The bouncer will let them through.
So now, how did you set the DC for that? Because that can be, while you have such a memorable game going on, and I want you to really touch on this, is sometimes player failures in rolling DC checks can just kill momentum in an otherwise incredibly tense situation. How did you set the
Mhm.
PC for that?
So I knew the players I had at the table. I knew that a lot of them had pretty high mods. We had some paladins in the group as well. And so the way I treated it was I took just the stat block I stole offline, blatantly stole
Mhm,
offline, couldn't even tell you the website it came from. The DC was set to 20, which given positive modifiers on the average player, especially if they have a whiz stat, they're getting a +5 on it. Their odds are pretty decent of cracking a 20.
mhm,
Um, Certainly with multiple repeats. And because they could suss out that I was BSing them,
mhm.
they kept looking for opportunities to figure stuff out and to ask questions. So they got a lot of bites at the apple until one. And I honestly, I did not know how it was going to resolve. I was going to keep cluing them and lowering the DC, but one player was clever enough to use the
Right.
coding and the languaging from the letter to then make it so cool. I now have an excuse and a reason for the Hydra to stop messing with them to then break the spell and let them proceed.
That makes sense. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I can tell you,
It
I
was
had a
fun.
fun time because I was nearby, and I got solicited to hum along with Nathan. So it got even creepier when Nathan was humming. There were random people around the table also beginning to hum this lullaby as well. So added kudos effects. If you can have people kind of chime in, things like that, talk about breaking a fourth wall, and all of a sudden you have other multiple people chiming in, and they know what's going on, and the players don't. It is a creepiness factor just goes up, man.
And I gotta tell you, the follow through as well. Again, like talking about carrying this through. The short version of how that story wrapped is they ended up not rolling any combat dice. A combat did start because they found the Hydra's lair, and then through some trickery, they ended up standing in place for 3 hours because they failed some DCs and finding themselves surrounded by the villagers, all mind controlled. And they didn't want to kill the villagers, so they had to retreat with as many as they could save. They got rolled against, but none of them rolled any combat. That mentally messed up a lot of the
Yeah.
player characters
Hmm.
because we had a paladin who's now an oath of vengeance. He dropped his oath because he felt like he was such a failure in that. And I've carried that on to the following month. I had some of those players at my table any opportunity that I could because I know the players. I know what they want to do with their characters. I took those opportunities to one of them jokingly just said, "Oh, I'm gonna roll a wisdom save," and I was like, "Oh yeah, okay, cool." And because he rolled below the Hydra's DC, I had him hallucinate the Hydra as the PTSD from that experience carried with his character further on. And by the way, if he's at your table, if Nero is at either of your table or Amazi, oh my God, guys, please keep that going because it's been like you see the emotion on the players as that has now stuck with them, both the realization of like, oh my God, to then, then carrying it as that weight of that story failure. Oh, it was
Yeah.
a good Christmas. It was really
Yeah,
good.
and those things that if you write down two or three more memorable moments, carrying those through to other one shots, even if they're different characters, sometimes just including them, just to have that PTSD flashback is a great way to kind of link things together and bring those memories back and emphasize the point that this really did make an impact to the characters in the campaign.
And it carries through because what's really cool is that so here at the Vanguard, for again any of our new listeners, you can read all the different reports our players write to the sessions, summary write ups, session write ups, character backgrounds and stories on vanguardguild.fandom.com. But one cool thing since we have this tool is it allows a way for our players to then again see something that happens in a session and want to go back to look at previous sessions. And I bring that up because also Sean, you want to talk about a masterclass of running a session to then get players to like, wait, what? And want to go back to look at a previous session. Let's talk about Cinder's Echo.
Yeah, Cinder's Echo was kind of fun because it was part of Night of Falling Stars, which is a huge kind of gamble, I want to say, on our part and how our players would react to it. And as we led up to that event, we started to see that we were really making our players a little unnerved about what we were going to deliver them. So, and talking with a couple of players that kind of really didn't want to get too deep into it, I said, okay, I had to kind of rework the idea. But the premise was to kind of tell the opposite side of the story of uh, a previous adventure called the Obsidian Caldera. And so the Obsidian Caldera already happened, so that was kind of the challenge in this, was trying to figure out a way to tell another one-shot adventure, but it was connected to it because it was the things that were happening behind the scenes of the Obsidian Caldera leading up to the final end. So we kind of fought the same in the end, they fought the same creature, which really gave me an opportunity the second time around to improve its battle mechanics and how it fought.
And actually, I think as well, we talked about the Obsidian Caldera before, if not on the second, like the third. It's in one of our earlier episodes of the podcast too. So now it's really cool that we started the podcast talking about the Obsidian Caldera, and now with season 2, we get to talk about the second time they did the Obsidian Caldera.
And just
I can't
to
wait
make
for the
sure
third
this
run.
isn't lost on everybody, the Obsidian Caldera was run from the point of view of the adventurers from the Vanguard Guild. Now, the Night of Falling Stars was supposed to be the surprise where we have sort of like you're running it from the evil point of view. But Sean, you said a couple of players kind of shied away from that. So talk us through, that other side and how you backed up and kind of reworked it.
Right. When I originally thought, it was like, okay, uh, I just wanted them to be just members of the monomaterial and kind of feel what it was like to be a penitent in the monomaterial. And for those who don't know, a penitent is kind of the hired mages that the monomaterial who do not like magic and they won't taint themselves. They'll get someone who is already corrupted with magic to do it for them and hire them, so to speak. But they're kind of a second-class citizen within the monomaterial, and that was where I started. I'm like, okay, they're going to make them feel kind of downtrodden, and as I started getting into, I'm like, that's kind of boring and it's not going to be that much fun. So I pivoted and said I decided to make them freedom fighters, the people who are within the monomaterial who are like, you know what, we're better off if we stay. And I think it alluded to that some of them had tried to escape the monomaterial previously and were captured and were tortured, and they realized that if we can't, defend ourselves, anybody here who wants to get out is going to just not make it. So they decided they were going to help them. And they became the underground, so to speak, of the monomaterial. And that led me, because in the Obsidian Caldera, it is wrapped around the idea of Khalid Mchala and his son Kalis, who joined the monomaterial almost through through things that had happened in their lives, and then really buy into it. But they wanted them to belong, so he let his son go on this science expedition, which in the Obsidian Caldera, it all goes bad because they release Cindermaw, the fire elemental, and Kalis was the only one who escaped. And then the Vanguard met him, and then that's when they realized, it was the first time our players had become to realize the monomaterial isn't just all bad people. Some of them are indoctrinated, some of them have just been kind of coerced into this group, and they need a new tribe, so they join them for better resources and the thought of a better life. So it was the first time I got to play with that. So then to kind of, now that they would all go back and read this stuff and kind of go, oh, okay, why are they, how do these two stories align, is because the freedom fighters, K-Lead, in the original story, they sent a monomaterial search party after the original group. So now I had to develop how this search party comes to be. And it's K-Lead going to look for his son, and he finds the individual members of this freedom fighting squad within the monomaterial.
So I have to ask, because as a DM, I'm truly asking advice here, because the idea of planning that, like anything when you're dealing with the overlapping nature of, okay, these players did this before, now go back and run something simultaneously, especially in the context of one shots, that gives me so much anxiety, because I fear how you coordinate the two. Did you have any challenges in prepping, like basically creating a time paradox potentially, or was that not a concern for you at all?
No, it was a bit of a concern that I wouldn't, like, the things that would have happened that now are happening behind the scenes, I had to try to make sure that they were not going to collide with the things that had happened. I already knew what had happened. Having that knowledge of what it was going to, what already had happened in the Obsidian Caldera, allowed me to kind of fill in those blanks. It really didn't. It was a bit of an obstacle, but I wanted to make sure that I didn't completely mess up what was going to happen in what had already happened in Obsidian Caldera, especially at the end fight when I believe Cherish was fighting and she got the killing blow, and I was like, well, how do you how I was going to describe that. I think you asked me this previously, and I made it seem like her blow happened at the exact same time as Bull and Bright Roar axe split. So in the end, when the Cindermaw falls, you see this dwarf standing in the middle of the fight, because they do realize that the Vanguard and the Monomaterial are fighting together against Cindermaw. That happened in both adventures, so I had to make sure that that was going to happen in Cinder's Echo, that they were going to be the ones who show up at the end while the Vanguard is already fighting Cindermaw. So they kind of had Cindermaw torn down a bit to make it easier to do, because they were a little bit lower in level.
Even that, I smile because I think of just a potential cool moment that you can have. I don't remember who we had for the original Obsidian Caldera, but just thinking about if someone were to take this idea and run it at their own table, their own home game, that creates such a beautiful moment for that thing in the movie where it's like, oh, remember that time back in Budapest, or when when I killed the thing? Oh, you mean when I killed the thing? No, I remember it happened like this. No, like it literally, you naturally create the opportunity for like that cliche, right? That pop culture thing, that thing that happens and we've seen 1,000 stories. Again, you literally put the players in a scenario where they get to naturally act out those cool moments. Oh, that's badass.
Yeah, it was really fun to do, and again, like I actually found it easier because I already knew what was going to kind of not happen. I didn't want to railroad them into it, so I wanted to still give them some freedom tracks to kind of do what they wanted to do with these particular new characters. Because remember, these were, in my case, I think it was Nero and Vahorn. They just took those characters and became the Monomaterial, the same type of characters. So they just flipped it. So they were now the exact same level, exact same, but now they were still the good guys. So I was able to kind of continue the arc that even though they were on the Monomaterial side, they were still good and they were still doing hero work, so to speak.
Nero's lucky he was at 2 of our memorable set. Ryan, was Nero at yours for yours?
No, not for this one.
No.
In fact, I don't
Dang.
know. No, he has played. He's played with me actually in a game. I don't think he's actually
Yes, I
played at any of the tables, but he definitely has played with me. Not Vahorn, but Nero. Nero was in one of the swamp episodes. I can't remember off the top of my head. The one that Rich ran. So,
gotcha.
but I will say,
there-
in just listening to this, it's if for those of you who are just tuning in first time, we run series of interconnected one shots. You know, we dub ourselves a crowdsource campaign, but that night I think we had 6 or 7 tables running at the same time, and it was a chance for each DM to kind of flex their creative muscles. And some could run what we call reskinned, so you take your player and just reskin them as a different person in the monomaterial. You could have been given character sheets as well. That was an option. And so there was all different ways to do this, and a lot of the tables came away with, well, I was this person in the monomaterial, and Sean's was one of the only tables that basically were able to say we were freedom fighters in the monomaterial. It's instantly memorable because even in a very, very unique setting like the Night of Falling Stars, it's a unique setting, right?
Yeah, I was trying to make it as uniquely as possible. And again, when I first thought, I had this thought when we first started talking about Night of the Falling Stars, that was the first thing I was like, oh, I could really have fun telling the opposite part of this and what the machinations that happened that led up into this. And I was so jazzed to do it. I think that kind of helped transfer it. But I remember the Obsidian Caldera had, it had a definitive storyline. And I remember because it was one of the first times in all of our adventures, I started to feel the connectivity because Bull and Bright Roar, the Dwarven Barbarian, who hasn't really played, I hope he comes back. I haven't seen him in a while, but he had just played the month before in your game, Nathan, where he got the Penitent, who was like the human fireball, and he got to see how bad the monomaterial treats magic users. And
Ryan was at that session too.
Right, and that was the moment when I remember, to me, it was one of the few times where the first moments where our stories are interconnected and we're having an impact in people remembering what happened last time and how it relates to this time. So when I saw Bull and Bright were very emotional about protecting the kid in the Obsidian Caldera, that made that happen. So now I get to kind of pull from all that emotion and make it kind of like the moment where father and son are reunited. and the freedom fighters had such a big hand in making that happen.
That's such a
Right.
cool one too, because again, we've talked about numerous times how we've each followed through on our individual sessions, but this is so cool because you actually, the session you're describing was your follow through, and
Mm-hmm.
again, I mean, again, we're echoing these principles over and over again, but because they're kind of naturally happening, like we summarized them at the start of the episode, but it's because like these are practices that work and
Mm-hmm.
have impacts on players as they go, and like I remember numerous of our players going back and checking the wiki because, like, wait a minute, oh wait, isn't that a session before? Because I think they'd heard about it on the podcast, and so they're
Right.
going and comparing notes. Like that, that's the cool stuff. And it
Right.
doesn't. You don't have to be doing a live stream, doing critical role numbers, doing I
Right.
suddenly can't remember the name of Dimension 20. You don't have to be doing any of their numbers, right? It's about the stories you're telling at your own tables, and to have, like, to me it is just as cool to have players in our own games seeing that continuity and immediately being like, oh my god, and wanting to go back. Like that's it's so powerful stuff.
It's my favorite part. It was kind of when you really think about it, it's part of the inception of this entire project was being able to connect people and their stories and watching multiple people tell stories on different tracks and different arcs, but they still somehow feel grounded in the same universe and the same space. And I think that is so important to making one shots feel like campaigns.
Right, right, which is a lot of what we do specifically here with the Vanguard.
Yeah.
I have to ask, because you did mention how you had the opportunity to change some things about the your big bad, like your final fight. Were there any other tweaks, design, like were you like, cool, 200 more health because I learned my lesson last time? Like, were there any other
Uh,
significant tweaks you made just to change the finale from a mechanical standpoint?
I modified some of the lair actions because we were talking about mythic actions earlier. I like lair actions which occur on specific initiative counts. So like I learned in the first time I made that like 20 initiative count 20. This is going to happen. I was way too late. Like it kind of really was inconsequential in the story the first time. So then I moved it up. I'm like, all right, well, let's move this into like initiative count. You know what I did? I think I took a D20 and I rolled it to decide when that layer action was going to happen. I think it was like 13. So as we went through each, and if you're not familiar with initiative count, as you count through, everyone takes their turn. If you have 6 players, by the second time through, you're at 12, right? You know, now we're concluding the monster. Now I'm at 13. So it's the 13th thing that has happened. That's when a layer action then would be. I think he used volcanic eruption, where he would just like flame on and it would blow flame across the entire playing surface and the entire combat area, so that everybody had to almost, get hit by kind of like a small fireball. And it's just to create just these other senses of chaos. So that was kind of one of the things I learned to do, was move around some of the lair actions and which lair action I would choose the first time or second time around. It was definitely more fun the second time.
God, I the biggest bummer I gotta say about doing this, like, hey, real peek behind the curtain for you listeners of the Vanguard Chronicles. The one thing I hate, people ask me all the time, they don't actually, but the one thing I hate about this and doing this show is I get to hear about the games you guys run at your table, and I don't get to play in any of those darn games.
I have the same thing. I have that same anger that I don't get to play in any of this. Some of these are great, and we have some great DMs. I mean, that I just love hearing their stories and hearing about how they developed it, how it worked for them. And they're like, I just want to play it.
And not just us, so we're clear. I don't want it to sound like we're all tooting our own horns here,
No,
but
no,
we have some amazing DMs at the Vanguard, and
yeah.
possibly this year you might be able to hear from more of them.
Yeah, we definitely
But
should bring them on the show.
yeah, but
And
not next
remember
time,
that
because
rule also goes for us. The general advice that we just gave up front is steal ideas. And where do you think we get some of the other ideas from? And we have,
Each other.
8 to 10 DMs, right? I mean,
I can
if we had more time at this restaurant, and I love our restaurant and I love them, but their people also have to go home at night. I'd stay there till midnight, 1 a.m. We do a cool down where I just sit down and turn on the recorder and record everybody talking about some of the stuff that happened at their table, because it's
that'd be
so
so cool.
thoroughly enjoyable to listen to how the twists and turns, because we all have meetings up front and say, okay, this is what we're going to do in generalities, And I love hearing the times where people, the DMs say, "Man, that went perfect. Everything I went exactly the way I thought it was." And then other people going, "Man, that just took a right turn to Albuquerque, but it was still really, really fun."
Right.
I on the subject of stealing, now that I think about it, I think I know how I can use the false Hydra all over again. They're gonna play as another party. Actually, hold up. Yeah, they're gonna play as another party who is mind controlled at the exact same time. And then it's just gonna be every session's another false Hydra session.
There you go.
Absolutely great.
But yeah, we
Well-
do have a great set of DMs that contribute so much to this project, and I get so jazzed. And you're right, we should figure out a way to get them, if not all of us, on just a round table. I'd love to do a cool down after a session. Maybe we can talk Days and Nights into giving us their back room for a little bit.
Maybe that's the move. But for next episode, it's going to be just us three Yahoos all over again, as we had a couple other really cool sessions that we wanted to cram into this episode. We're going to keep talking about some of just really memorable, super cool, unique sessions that we have gotten to run, and hopefully give you guys some inspiration for cool stuff you can run at your own tables. But aside from that, we have one other really awesome idea we're trying that I've been stoked to talk about the entire episode. I'm mad I didn't tease it earlier. I am not a professional. And that is specifically for our question of the episode regarding an upcoming episode. So one thing we like to do among us DMs when we're not planning big story arcs is challenge each other. The way we typically do it is I will have our 3D printer guy print a model, and then I hand it to Ryan and Sean, laugh at their responses, and say, okay, cool, now write a one-shot using this model. We're going to do something similar for you guys. Because we want to put our monies where our mouth is and continue to be the one-shot guys here, we are actually going to ask, if you are listening to this episode or you're watching it on YouTube, please head to the comments section on our YouTube channel for this episode specifically and comment any plane of existence within the D&D cosmology. You can find it at the back of your player's handbook or in your Dungeon Master's Guide. Be the Feywild, Plane of Fire, Carceri, a particular layer of the 9 hells or the abyss, whatever it is. Choose any, write it down in the comment section. We will count up the votes to see which one is the most popular. And then on an upcoming episode, we have to get ready for the monster manual. And of course, we will do more of these ones. We're all going to design our own unique one-shots and give our ideas for that particular plane, because I just like creative writing challenges, and these two are coming with me.
Now that could be kind of fun. Now let me make sure we're clear on this. Are we going to collaborate on a one shot from this?
Absolutely not. You on your own, boy.
I write mine, you write yours, and Ryan and maybe another DM will finally write their own. We'll just kind of
just
see
like
how
an episode of the Vanguard.
See how we tell the same, which ideas we come up for the same basic premise is what you're saying. I got you.
Precisely. And if anyone wants an idea, an example of this, if you look actually to one of our previous episodes, we kind of did something similar to this on our episode about hags, where we kind of came up with, Sean and I came with our own session plans or session ideas for how you could tell a story with a hag, but we're going to really go in more depth as far as the kind of sessions that we would run on one of these planes, say if the Vanguard had to go there. So please, in addition to liking, in addition to subscribing, doing all things to keep the algorithm going in a continually algorithm-driven world, please comment below with what plane you want to challenge us to write a one-shot for, and we'll see what we can come up with. How's it sound, guys?
Yeah,
That's
I love
awesome.
that idea. That'll be fun. Yeah, it'll be
Sweet.
fun. Remember, like and subscribe and all that stuff too. Definitely really helps, and you can support the charity. We have links and stuff in all the descriptions, so all that does really help.
Yeah, guys, we love doing this, and we're so excited for a second season of the Vanguard Chronicles. So, Ryan, thank you for joining us on this one. Sean, thank you as always for being our partner in crime here, and guys, thank you for listening. We'll see you on the next one.
All right.
Oh, baby, this is gonna be easy. Easiest bumper of my life, dog.
Sometimes you'll see it, the rainbow connection. Feywild, Borealis, and
Fuck
me.
you. Hey, yo, everybody, we're the one-shot guys on this episode of the Vanguard Chronicles. Forget about it. Hey, I got your one shot right here. Bop. That's not the bumper. Oh, let's go. Oh. Hey, my neck, my back, my... It's time to start the music. It's time to light the lights. It's time. Oh fuck! It's time to get things started on the Vanguard Chronicles tonight. I couldn't remember the word.
And white. Hey, with a one-shot guy.
Hey, what a one-shot guys.
Nigga Backo.
Got your one shot here. Bop.
Bop, bop.
Thank you, everyone on YouTube, for watching yet another episode of the Vanguard Chronicles podcast. We hope you had as much fun as we did recording it. While you're here, go ahead and please answer the question of the week down in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video, help us out with those metrics, and absolutely subscribe so you know when more of our content's coming. Sean, I had a great time, and I hope you did, and I can't wait to see everyone on the next one.